1, 2, 3, 4!
History in every century records an act that lives forever. We'll recall in the line we hold the thing that happened on Hawaii shore. Let's remember the Pearl Harbor.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall never surrender.
When the Führer says he is the master race, we heil, heil, right in the Führer's face.
We were the heaviest bombed town in the whole of the UK because of the Battle of Atlantic. We were the main supply of food coming mainly from your country, that the submarines almost won the war before we ever fought them in France. I can remember we got any gum chump. We kids, I was 9 at the time, used to go saying to the Yanks, have we got any gum chump, because sweets were rationed in those days.
Great Britain had come through a really bad time. I mean, everything was particularly grey, I suppose, and people dressed in grey clothes, and then the Teddy Boys thing started there. I mean, I remember I thought, I was so great when I went out and bought a pair of bright pink socks. I mean, that was the best thing going, wandering around in bright pink socks. But every generation probably has its rebels.
But there were so many fights. Yeah, Liverpool was a violent playground.
Number 9 Madryn Street, The Dingle, Liverpool, birthplace of Ringo Starr. He was born here on the 7th of July 1940 and was the only child of Richie and Elsie Starkey. But when he was just a boy, his parents split up. His dad moved back in with his own parents down the end of the street, and Mrs. Starkey eventually swapped houses with a friend of hers for a few reasons: to get away from her ex-husband, too close for comfort, to do this friend a favour because she had 3 children rather than 1, and for the cheaper rent. So they moved just across the road to Admiral Grove, but this was the birthplace of Ringo Starr. We're at Oxford Street Maternity Hospital, the birthplace of John Lennon. Could be where it all began. On the 9th of October 1940, this is where John came into the world. Some stories say he was born during an air raid in the Second World War. All of the Beatles were born during the war, but not in John's case. Sometime during his stay in hospital, there was an air raid and the cots had to be put underneath the metal beds to keep them safe, just in case there was a direct hit. Now, Auntie Mimi was the first person to see John after his mother, and as soon as she saw this little baby, she picked him up in her arms. She looked at him and felt responsible for him straight away, and of course it was Mimi who ended up bringing John up from the age of 5. But this is where it all began for John. Oxford Street Maternity Hospital in Liverpool city centre. Walton Hospital, the birthplace of Paul McCartney, on the 18th of June 1942. Now, Paul was given a nice welcome into the world because his mother was a midwife on the ward here, so he was given special treatment. They were given their own private room and everything, which was unheard of back then. Now, when his father first saw this baby, his firstborn, he went back home and cried because he thought he'd never seen such an ugly baby in all his life, and you could not call Paul McCartney ugly nowadays by any standards. But this was it. Walton Hospital, birthplace of Paul McCartney on the 18th of June 1942. George Harrison was born here in 12 Arnold Grove on the 25th of February 1943. Whereas Ringo just lived with his mother in a two-up, two-down house, George lived with his mother, his father, his two brothers and his sister, so it was a bit of a tight squeeze. Number 12 Arnold Grove, the birthplace of George Harrison.
I don't remember a time when he wasn't there. So, I mean, I remember my sister, my baby sister, Jackie, arriving on the scene. I'm 2 years, 8 months older than she is. But when he came, we had a 3-bedroomed house, like Mimi did. And my sister was in the small room, being the baby, and I was in the big room, next to my parents. They were in the big room. And when John came, Jackie, I had a double bed. Jackie slept with me, and John had her room. So her room was also John's room. So I can remember him in school uniform, I can remember him in playing clothes, in white cricket clothes, as a little boy. But little, I am 6.5 years younger than John, so we're talking teenage little boy. But he was quite small for a long time. He wasn't a tall boy.
Well, I think I must have been about 6 and John was about 7, because I lived in Woolton and I went to the Sunday school at St Peter's Church, and in my class there was Pete Shotton, Ivan Vaughan, Nigel Wally, and we started probably when we were 4 or 5, but John apparently didn't move till Woolton till he was about 7 years old, so that was when I first met John. And he was the one that spent his collection on bubblegum and chewing gum. So if you want to know what John was like from a very early age, he was obviously marked out to be a villain, because all the rest of us handed our collection in, and John and Pete, he persuaded Pete as well to spend his collection on bubblegum. Obviously a villain from the word go, you know. He was very physical with Jackie and I, so that he would stand and you'd stand back to back with him. He did what my father did, which was pull you through the legs so that you stand up. And he'd have a go, and my mother would be screaming at him, don't, you're not strong enough, you'll crack her head on the floor, you'll crack their heads, you know, because he would try and do the same thing, and did do the same thing. Aeroplanes swinging around and stuff.
Well, the first time I met him, I thought he was quite a quiet individual. When I first met him, he wasn't really sort of outgoing particularly. And I felt that he was sort of weighing me up, you know, sort of standing back, so who's this guy coming into our gang, whatever. But he did have on him at the time a cartoon book, and I recollect now it was called The Daily Howl, which he did cartoon characters of his masters at the school where he went. And I thought, well, he's got a sense of humour, he's my kind of guy. I remember The Daily Howl, I remember it being done. It was John's record, a diary, a daily diary, and he did everything in Indian ink, on white. He didn't like colour at all. He was going to be a painter, he would have had to have been forced to put any colours in. He only liked black and white. And it was in thick in Indian ink, the pens, the old like calligraphy pens. And I remember him going firm and then narrow and then turning it backwards, and then there'd be blots all over the place as well, you know, it had blotted. And there'd be this fellow with a studdle or reading the newspaper, and then there'd be a big bubble with, wow, it's raining today, or it's been raining again today, or whatever. And it was his daily record. They were really good, they were brilliant, and his poetry was weird. It got published in the school magazine. His first poem, called The Tale of Hermit Fred, or something like that. And at one occasion, him and Pete Shotton at Quarry Bank School Garden Fete had this dart stall with drawings of the teachers, and the teachers were absolutely delighted about this, especially the ones that were actually caricatured. They thought it was brilliant, because he was very, very good, very good. So that was his main talent, really. Although he probably thought all the teachers thought he was absolutely terrible. You know, I've known a few of them since, and I stayed on a bit later. They didn't think he was quite as black as he felt that they painted him, you know. I know my mother was enormously witty, a wordsmith, very witty, very dry, very funny.
I can only imagine that he would have inherited it and learned it as well. It would have been nature and nurture there.
I mean, I didn't particularly think of her as being his mother. You know, it's more that she looked like his big sister and sounded like his big sister. That's the way they acted. It wasn't mum and dad. You know, mum and son. It was brother and sister.
Well, I only met her about twice. I remember going to her house, and I thought she was I don't know, quite a unusual character, put it that way. Unusual character. I don't think she minded particularly if John's didn't go to school. You know, did you go round to her place and play some songs or whatever and listen to records?
Everyone has been very unfair to my mother all the way down the line, as if it explains John. And that's why when I found that quote of John's, it's a quotation about, I did have a mother, she was very important to me. I thought, go with that one.
Yes, Julia was supportive of that side of John. I think that they were kindred spirits, really, to do that. She was quite zany, but we used to go along to her house. We used to, do you understand, Skyvop School? And we used to go along to her house and listen to music. I think Jean Vincent was a record she had and really first introduced us to Jean Vincent type music.
Well, as everybody knows, Julia taught John and Eric to play banjo chords.
We found it difficult to start playing the guitar very easily using guitar chords because we were trying to, a tutor was trying to force us to play in the traditional sense. All we wanted to do was strum and make music, and so playing banjo was easier than playing the guitar, so she retuned the guitars to banjo keys and taught us the chords.
And whenever we went to her house to practice, I had a real banjo, so she used to say to me, oh, I don't want to play those horrible guitars, give me a banjo. So she always grabbed my banjo and started playing banjo chords on that. So this was quite extraordinary to see somebody's mum who played the banjo, you know.
I think she recognised also that Mimi was very strict, and she would have definitely set out to weigh that, balance it a bit. But she was the mother in that she did all the cooking, she did all the washing, she did all the cleaning, she changed all the beds. I mean, you don't do that for your mates.
And she was very encouraging of what we were doing, and because, of course, we didn't have any amplifiers or anything like that, she would let us go and stand in the bathroom, because you get a much better echo off the tiles and things like that. So she was, you know, quite unusual from that point of view. She not only, you know, she really actively encouraged us to play and so on, have fun. It was quite strange, really.
At aged 11, I don't think you could say John was the John the world got to know later on. It was when he was about 13, 14 that he started to become more of a rebel, and really was a bit of a problem to the teachers at school and a problem to some of the parents of his friends.
In that day and age, probably in this day and age as well, when you're upsetting the parents or the elders, you tend, if you've got a bit of wisdom about you, you tend to doctor it down, don't you? And with John, yes, Mimi was having a big go at him, because it was breaking new ground. A lot of them were doing it, and Mimi just didn't like it, but I'm not putting her down for that. No parent would have liked it, but my mother would have positively encouraged it, bought him the clothes, so there's probably a bit of tussle going on there.
I don't think Mimi was as hard on John as was made out later. She obviously had concern for John, what he wasn't doing at school, the direction he was going, and she was really just trying to put a few brakes on him, that's all. It wasn't that he was not intelligent, he was intelligent, but really the school environment and his own interests just turned him off school.
Before the Quarrymen were ever even thought of, there was a gang of us. There was Nigel Wally, myself, Ivan, there was Pete Shotton and John, and we used to meet in Coldstones Park on the bank, like a grassy bank there. We used to spend all days, all summer. We just threw our bikes on the bank on a hot summer afternoon. We were all off school. It was a great vantage point for spying the beauties walking along the park. So, and John would have his mouth organ, he could play some tunes, and Of course, the American influence of music was coming on as Johnny Ray. I would take Johnny Ray off, you know, and we'd sing Frankie Lane songs, and John would play his harmonica. Just have fun.
I think you probably have to be rock on line, I think, because without that, none of this would have happened. None of it would have happened. We wouldn't have had a rock scene in England. We wouldn't have a folk revival in England. I'd probably still be, well, I wouldn't be playing traditional jazz. No, it's got to be rock on line. It's got to be rock on line.
Well, rock on the line, if it's a mighty good road. Well, the rock on the line is the road to ride. Yeah, the rock on the line is a mighty good road. And if you want to ride it, gotta ride it like a find it. Get your ticket at the station on the rock on the line.
Skiffle was easy to play. It enabled thousands and thousands of youngsters to start playing music and therefore participating rather than just listening to music and perhaps not having any opportunity to do it themselves, because previous to skiffle you really had to be more of a trained musician and read music and conform to playing in bands of sort of 40s, 30s, that type of music. But skiffle just opened it all out and just made an explosion of music in this country.
Well, the States had loads of money, didn't they? They wanted the old proper instruments to play, you know, and look good, whereas the Brits were a bit below the scruffs, really. They'd take a box or a washboard or anything, as long as it beat out a rhythm, and play some music.
came down, and when he went, she'd go, that poor boy's lost his mother. That was ironic, wasn't it? Yes, and the fact that she did die gave John and Paul an almost inseparable bond then. That they did really come to rely on each other and grow into each other's pockets, I would say. Yeah, it's certainly, I would think from my point of view, only looking at it later, of course, cement a friendship in a very deep way. John is a world icon. John is a world icon number 2, actually. John is John, number 1. And number 2, he happened to become famous. And he was multi-talented genius. There's no dispute about that. But John was 17. I was 11. And my sister was only 8. Yeah, we were completely rocked, as anybody would be. He wasn't famous then, remember. This was just a family where the mother had gone out and never come back.
John Lennon's mother had tragically been killed, knocked over by a drunken policeman.
Certainly it was difficult to deal with. It's difficult to see the police as a kind, caring, you know, let's go to them if we need help. But that's hardly fair. It's one man. And many people knock people down in cars and don't kill them. Many people drive when they've been drinking and don't kill people. I feel very sorry for him that that happened to him. It was a dreadful thing to happen to his life, wasn't it? As well. I'm just always try and see the other side of things. I mean, he's had to pick his life up and live with that. And not only has he had to live with that as a family man, whatever, the mother he did kill was probably one of the most famous mothers on the planet. So he hasn't been able to put it away, has he? I don't know how much I want to say of this story, but we weren't told about my mother dying. They didn't know what to do with us. I think they would have preferred us to just disappear into the ethers, Jackie and I. We were just totally in the way. They couldn't deal with us at all, and they didn't attempt to. We were sent to school. Jackie and I were actually sent to school that day. And the head obviously knew, because he was washing our faces all day and saying your mother's in hospital and things like that. And it was just, looking back on it, I mean, child abuse is what you would call it now. And so my aunt came down from Scotland, and we'd rarely seen her. We hardly knew who she was. And we were taken up to Scotland after school. You're coming to stay on holiday. And my father came in and out, but he was at the hospital. But my mother had died instantly, or as near to instantly, but we weren't told anyway. So we were taken up to Scotland, where we'd never been before. And we stayed in the Edinburgh house for about a month. And the next morning my uncle got us up and just told us that our mother had died. Got us up at 6 o'clock in the morning and said, come downstairs, I want to speak to you. And stood sort of down at us. But his motive was good. He said, this can't go on. And my aunt got up and started shouting at him, you had no right to tell them. I'll never forget it. And he screamed at her, you have no right not to tell them. But they've forgotten us already. Jackie and I are in a complete state, and they're having this row over whether or not we should have been told. It was just crazy. I mean, I can hardly think about it without just getting knotted up, because it was just beyond belief. But John and I talked about it at great length when he started phoning again, and he said, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I was completely helpless. And I've got a copy of a letter that says, that John says, I wanted the girls to live with me, with Mimi, but Mimi wouldn't have it, but I wanted it. But again, he was too young to have any influence. So, yes, John had a thing against authority. I have, my sister has. But it's not just the police, it was the strictness of the family. It was just do this, do that, do the other. You know, you will do this, you will do that. You will go to bed now, you will live here. We all had that.
It was just a continuation of the same group, and, you know, unfortunately people came and went. You know, Pete Shotton went, and Rod went, and then Len went, and eventually Eric went.
Well, I had tubercular meningitis when I was 16. That was 1958. You know, I nearly died and whatever. That took me out of the quarrymen, basically. That was it. And they used to come in and visit me in hospital. When they did start talking at that particular time that we were going to change the name to the Beatles, and I thought, well, what a strange name. First image for me was little crawly things. I never related it to beat music. And soon after, of course, George joined, and they became the Beatles.